Hi, I'm Barbara Mendez and I'm a nutritionist and a pharmacist, and today we're going to be making kale pesto. And the reason that I love this dish is because I'm constantly recommending to my clients that they include kale into their diets. And the reason for that is because kale is very nutritious, it's loaded in carotenoids, it's loaded in calcium, it's a great source of calcium. It's also a great cancer fighter. It literally destroys cancer in its path. So whenever you can include it in your diet, you're completely encouraged to do that. Except that it's a very textured and tough vegetable. So most of my clients find it difficult to eat it or include it in their diet without completely boiling it and destroying all its properties. So when I found this recipe and I tweaked it to make it as nutritious as possible, I thought, wow, this is a great way to get kale and help people get kale into their diet, as well as other really nutritious foods. So this recipe is great if you have cardiovascular disease, if you have it running in your family. It's also really good as a cancer fighter or a cancer preventer, and because of the inclusion of walnuts, it's also great for mood and for balancing brain chemistry. So what we're going to start out with is this is an enormous head of kale. Let me just back up and also say that if you can't get organic kale, which I recommend that you do, get regular kale and clean it very, very well. You might want to get a fruit and vegetable cleaner that you can get in most health food stores. You just spray it on and it strips the leaves of all the pesticides and herbicides that might be on there. So clean the kale really well. Like I said, this is a really big head of kale, so I've upscaled all the ingredients to accommodate this size, but a usual head of kale is about half this size. So this recipe, I'm going to use shallots, and these are farmers market shallots. They're pretty big because I got them locally and they're in season and they're enormous. So I'm only going to use 4 of these big ones. If I were using typical shallots for something this size, it would be twice that many. So 4 shallots. Again, this recipe calls for about 4 cloves of garlic, but because of the size of this head of kale, I'm using more than that. And I also really love garlic. Garlic is great for your circulatory system. It helps to fight cancer. It's good for connective tissue, so it's good for your skin and your hair. It's wonderful to include cancer-fighting properties, immune-boosting properties. So I'm going to take these 2 things, and I'm going to put them in this pot of water that I have already started boiling back here. And I'm going to boil them for 3 minutes. In the meantime, we're going to be making this recipe in this Vitamix. So what I've done prior to starting this film is that I've toasted these walnuts. Now, walnuts are also an excellent source of omega-3 essential fatty acids, which are great for your circulation, to prevent inflammation in the body. But omega-3s are excellent at boosting serotonin in your brain. Serotonin is the chemical in our brain that makes us feel calm and happy. So I've chosen walnuts because it's what I had on hand. I toasted them because toasting them releases a fragrance that adds a complexity to the recipe that just brings it to another level. But if you don't have walnuts at home, you can use really any kind of nut. I wouldn't use peanuts because peanuts have a very distinct sort of flavor that wouldn't necessarily complement the kale. But what's a wonderful nut to use for this recipe is pine nuts. Pine nuts have something called pinolenic acid that is great for suppressing appetite. The way that it works is that it hits the pleasure center in your brain really quickly, the satiety center in your brain, so that your brain understands that it's feeling full and comfortable much sooner than if you didn't include the pine nuts in the dish. So as opposed to most pasta dishes that you would probably want to keep eating and eating, when you include pine nuts, it triggers that satiety center quickly, so therefore you eat less. So if diabetes is your issue or obesity is an issue for you, then pine nuts would be the nut to include. And again, you'd want to toast them. So for a recipe with a normal head of kale, you would use about half a cup of pine nuts toasted. Same with the walnuts, but because this is so big, I'm using about a cup. I toasted them up prior to us beginning the filming, so I'm going to just throw that straight into the Vitamix. And we'll set that to the side. Okay. What we're also going to do, and I could add this straight away, is use a half a cup of olive oil. Again, typical recipe, it's less than that, but because it's so big, I'm using about a half a cup. I'll likely need to add a little bit more towards the end of when we've completed it and I've tasted it. So half a cup of olive oil, put that straight into the Vitamix. And then we're going to add 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. And the lemon juice is great because this recipe can not only be eaten the minute you make it, which is great because it's very quick to make, but it's also something that you could store in plastic containers and then freeze and then defrost it someday down the road when you feel like having some pasta. It keeps, because of the lemon, the colors keep. It doesn't turn brown, preserves it, gives it a nice flavor. So we're going to add about a tablespoon of lemon juice Again, because it's actually such a big head of kale, I'm going to do a little bit more. I'll add that in. Okay. I'm going to use a pinch of pepper, so a little bit of pepper. And this pink salt is an artisanal salt that I bought in California last year when I was driving up the coast with my best friend. I love this salt. It's pink in color, it's loaded in minerals, and it's not that salty. So it has like a very subtle salty flavor to it. So I use a good amount of that because, again, it requires, it's not that salty, and I'll likely have to adjust that flavor afterwards. So this has been here for about 3 minutes. Well, actually, we'll give it another minute. And once it's been boiling for 3 minutes, we add our head of kale. And what you want to do with the kale is you just want to put it in for 10 seconds. So it's just enough to wilt it. What I've done with this kale in preparation for this is that I removed the tough ends, which I didn't even have to necessarily do, because this Vitamix is a very high-speed blender that would mulch this to smithereens. So I really didn't have to do it, but this also has a bitter quality to it that could affect the final flavor of a dish. So I removed the hard ends, but everything else is intact. We want to put it in the boiling water for 10 seconds just to wilt it, but we don't want to destroy the properties of the kale. So it's just a very quick flash in the boiling water, and we take it out, put it straight into the Vitamix, which I'm going to go ahead and do right now. So you want to make sure you have a big enough pot to accommodate the kale. And then I'm going to use these tongs to press this down and make sure it all gets in there. Okay. So that's about 10 seconds. Now we're going to transfer the whole thing to the Vitamix. Like I said, this Vitamix is a high-powered blender. It'll blend anything, even the hardest textured things, into a paste very quickly. But this recipe can be made in any blender. I've made it at friends' homes that have blenders from the dinosaur age, and it works just fine. So you don't think you have to go out and get this in order to make this dish. So we're going to use the tongs. I'm going to pull out first the things that I put in first. So the garlic and the shallots will come out first with some kale. And then put the kale straight in there. So don't be afraid of including some of the water from the kale and the shallots, because you're going to need some of that liquid to make this into a sauce, right? So don't be afraid of including that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use this water to make the pasta. You don't have to pour this out and then use a whole different pot of water. This is going to have the flavors of the kale and the shallots and the garlic, which adds a little bit of an added dimension to the pasta when you're cooking it. So we'll put this on here. In the meantime, I'm going to hike this up. I use brown rice pasta. I'm always encouraging my clients to move away from whole wheat or wheat products because of the gluten. And even if you don't have celiac disease, even if you're not anybody who has any problems with gluten products, I find that gluten can cause bloating, it can cause problems with your digestion. So subtle things that you might not even realize are related to wheat could be related to wheat. So whenever you can move away from that, it's useful. So I like brown rice pasta. If you're going to use brown rice pasta, which I totally recommend, I would get this brand, Tinkyata. Tinkyata doesn't fall apart. A lot of brands out there of brown rice pasta become mushy once you start cooking them. This does not do that. It maintains its texture, and it can be cooked al dente. It's delicious. So I'm going to pour that in there, right into that same water. I like using different shapes. This is a fusilli, so just to make it more fun. And we'll let that cook. And in the meantime, let's make our pesto. So I know from experience that I'm going to need this plunger to push everything down. let's just give it a taste, see how if it needs to be adjusted. A little bit of salt, like I thought. A little bit of pepper. And I'm going to just use another slug of olive oil to give it a little bit more. And just give it another minute in here. Okay. And that's it. So now we'll wait for our pasta to cook. Yum. We'll blend it all together and then we have a really nice dinner. You can make a nice big salad, toss this with brown rice pasta, put it on the side, and you have a great meal. If you are a person that tends to avoid pasta, let's say you're trying to do a low carb diet, another great way to serve this is to just cook up some chicken, cut it into cubes, and toss it with that sauce. It's a great complement to any sort of meat dish, and it gives it a little bit more vegetable. So again, we'll be back in about 3 minutes to finish up with the pasta. Okay, so now we have our bowl of cooked pasta, and what we're going to add straight to that is the kale pesto. So take this out, pour some in. So I likely have plenty left over, and like I said earlier, because of the lemon in there, I could just put this in a plastic container and freeze it and then use it some other day down the road when I want a really quick, easy meal. So mix this up. Let's get rid of this. I think I need a little bit more. So again, loaded in antioxidants, loaded in calcium. So one of the finest ways to get calcium into your diet is with dark green leafy vegetables. It helps to help support adrenal function, bone density, all of that. So look at that. Gorgeous dish, loaded in nutrients. It's got calcium, it's got carotenoids, it's got omega-3s, it's got some great brown rice pasta, good for balancing your mood, good for your cardiovascular system. Basically one of the best foods that you can eat for your health. So if you want to know about more recipes like this that can help you with either cancer prevention or heart disease or mood food, check out my website at www.barbaramendeznutrition.com. Also check out my blog, rootsandseeds.com. I've got plenty of recipes on there, or you can follow me on Facebook or Twitter. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.